Buenas noches. Good evening. I bring the regrets of the CUNY Chancellor, Felix Matos Rodriguez. He originally would have been here in place of me, but a duty call, and there was a emergency Board of Trustees meeting, and he's off working at 42nd Street. So I am Josh Brumberg, the president of the CUNY Graduate Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to CNN Voto Latino 2024. Tonight's event is presented by CNN en Español, the Graduate Center's Center for Latin American, Caribbean, and Latino Studies, which is better known as CLACLS, and our Office of Public Programs. CLACLS is one of CUNY's most prominent research centers, and we are delighted to have CLACLS Executive Director and Distinguished Professor of History, Laird Bergad, with us tonight. As one of the founders, he has been an integral part of the center's important work since it opened in 2001. Dr. Bergad has worked closely with CNN en Español since the 2016 election, appearing as a commentator in Atlanta on election night, and since then doing several studies for them. The relationship between CLACLS and CNN is a prime example of how the Graduate Center produces high-quality research for the public good, and how national organizations often rely on our experts to support the work that they do. The core mission of CLACLS is to actively support and advance the study of Latin America, the Caribbean, and Latinos in the United States in the doctoral programs here at the Graduate Center. It also aims to provide opportunities for Latino students at the doctoral level. Since its founding, CLACLS has given more than $3 million in financial support, as well as mentorships and fellowships to more than 500 PhD students. CLACLS has a flawless track record. Every student who has received a fellowship has gone on to complete their PhD and, most importantly, find a job. Through its flagship program, the Latino Data Project, CLACLS also shares information on the dynamically growing U.S. Latino populations. The project launched in 2003 and has produced more than 100 reports on Latino life in the United States. Dr. Bergad has spearheaded the project, and tonight he will speak for about 10 minutes about his latest research. After that, he will be joined on stage by fellow expert panel. Moderating the panel will be Juan Carlos López, anchor and chief correspondent at CNN Español, and he will moderate a discussion that will include CNN's Democratic strategist, Maria Cardona, Republican strategist, Rocio Velez as well, who is the co-anchor for the CNN News Central, along with Dr. Bergad. But before we get to our discussion, we have a special treat for you. We are so lucky to kick things off with a sneak peek from the upcoming Broadway musical, Buena Vista Social Club, which was inspired by the making of this beloved and best-selling Afro-Cuban album. The show ran previously at the Atlantic Theater Company in Chelsea and is scheduled to begin Broadway previews on February 21st of the new year. We have two extraordinarily talented performers from that show with us tonight, and I now like to introduce Renacito Avich and David Oquendo, who will perform Chan Chan. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Cueto, voy para Mayarí. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Cueto, voy para Mayarí. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Cueto, voy para Mayarí. El cariño que te tengo yo no lo puedo negar. Se me sale la babita y no lo puedo evitar. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Cueto, voy para Mayarí. Cuando Juanica y Chan Chan en el mar se vendían la arena, como sacudí el jibe, a Chan Chan le daba pena. Limpia el camino de paz, que yo me quiero sentar en aquel tronco que veo y así no puedo llegar. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Cueto, voy para Mayarí. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Cueto, voy para Mayarí. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Cueto, voy para Mayarí.
Thank you. Before I formally begin this presentation, you're going to see a dizzying array of data here. Forget about the data. The data tell a story. It's the story that is important. The data are just supporting evidence for the story that I'm going to try to tell about patterns of voting in the Latino community over the last couple of decades. All right, this graphic is very graphic. It shows the increase in the number of eligible Latino voters in the United States between 1992 and 2024, the number of registered voters, which you'll see is significantly less than the potential voting pool, and the people who voted. We are estimating that in this next election, some 15 to 16 million Latinos will vote. And let's move on to the next slide. They will comprise about 12 to 13% of all votes cast nationally. Now, the one thing I would like to make clear from the get-go here is that there's no such thing as a Latino vote. There are Latinos who vote, and Latinos are very, very, very different geographically and with respect to national origins. Now, one of the historical issues that Latinos who vote have faced was low registration rates. In the 2020 election, it is the very first time that more than 60% of eligible Latinos actually registered to vote. In all previous elections back to 1992, less than 60% registered. And in the 2020 election, it's the very first time that more than 50% of eligible Latino voters actually went to the polls. So we are hoping that this history of low registration rates, low participation rates, will have ended, and we'll only know after November 5th of this year. Now, what we can see here is the increase in the number of Latinos who registered and the increase in the number of Latinos who voted. And I think that's the important part of this graphic here, that registered voters and actual people who voted have increased significantly. So again, to repeat, we're hoping this breaks the cycle of low registration, low participation rates, because Latino political power is not really being exercised to its full potential due to these lower participation rates. I'll leave the commentators to comment on what the reasons behind this for. That's not my purpose here today. Now, this graphically shows that Latinos had the lowest registration rate and lowest voter participation rate in the 2020 election. And once again, to reiterate, that means Latino political power is not being manifested as it should be if we had higher rates of registration, higher rates of voting. Now, as I indicated before, this geographical and national origin diversity of Latino voters torpedoes the idea of a Latino vote as a homogeneous bloc. It just doesn't exist. And I think this graphic here really underlines this. You can see that well over 50% of all Latino voters are concentrated in 3 states where we already know probably what the outcome's going to be: California, Texas, and Florida. And you see the other states here, including some of the swing states and some of them not. What I've emphasized here is that if we look at the 7 swing states that are still in play, only about 11% of all Latinos nationally will be eligible to vote in those 7 states. So I think that's an important point to take note of. The national origins of Latino voters. Nearly 60% are of Mexican origin. And one of the things I want to emphasize about Mexican voters, or those of Mexican origin, is that most were born in the United States. We're not dealing with an immigrant population here. We're dealing with a population that is often 3rd, 4th, 5th generation. The second most populous group, Puerto Ricans, citizens of the United States, significantly smaller. So when we see on the news, not on CNN, of course, about a Voto Latino, there is no such thing as a homogeneous Voto Latino. There are different national origins, different geographical specificities. And I might also add that about close to 90% of all registered Latino voters were born in the United States. We're not looking at an immigrant population. There is a naturalized sector of this population, but most were born in the United States. Let's turn to the all-important swing states, and we can see how different they are. Again, underlining the fact that there is no Voto Latino. Obviously, in Arizona and Nevada, we have the largest contingents of Latinos who vote. Most are of Mexican origin. And as I indicated before, most of these people were born in the United States. If we move to Georgia, which is going to be a critical state, we see that 6% of all eligible voters in the state of Georgia are of Latino origin. The largest contingents, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans. As we move down to Pennsylvania, which increasingly seems to be the most critical swing state of them all, we see a totally different picture than we see in the other swing states. We see a predominance of Puerto Rican voters who are concentrated in Philadelphia. What are the Republican and Democratic parties doing to mobilize this potential voting population? I don't know. We also find that Mexicans play a critical role. Dominicans, second in importance from a numerical point of view, basically concentrated in Reading, Allentown, Hazleton, Easton, huge numbers of Dominican origin voters, most of whom also were born in the United States. So Pennsylvania is a very different animal than the other swing states. We can see in North Carolina, we're also talking about Mexicans and Puerto Ricans when we talk about Latino voters. The same can be said about Wisconsin and Michigan. And despite the fact that in states like Wisconsin and Michigan, you only have 4 or 5% of the potential voting population of Latino origin, given the closeness of the election in 2020, these voters could really turn the election one way or the other. Some empirical evidence of the shift toward Republicans, all right? We see that the Democratic Party won about 2/3 of Latino votes, according to exit polling in 2016 and 2020. We don't know what's going to happen here, but what we do find very clearly here is that if you look at this very dense statistical table, the increase in Republican votes in each of the swing states was much more robust than the increase in Democratic votes. Whether that trend that's between 2016 and 2020, whether that trend will continue in 2024 is an open question mark, but clearly, if it does continue, it'll make the Democratic victory a little bit more difficult in each of these swing states. Let's continue to explore this issue of the shift toward the Republican Party, not from polling data, but from actual votes. So I did a study where I looked at the 101 counties in the United States where 50% or more of the population was Latino. And I actually saw the voting totals in these. Now you can see red counties were counties that went Republican, blue counties were counties that went Democratic. If we look at those 101 counties, you see that the increase in Republican votes between 2016 and 2020 was nearly 54%, while the increase in Democratic votes was 29%. So these data clearly show this movement toward Republican voters. And once again, in these 101 counties, 41% of votes were Republican in 2016, 45% in 2020. So these are actual votes. Again, will this trend continue? Who knows? And then I looked at the largest Latino origin counties in the United States. I looked at the largest ones, and these show who won. But when we turn over to the increase in votes, once again, in these largest Latino population counties, we see that Republican votes increased at a more dramatic rate between 2016 and 2020 than Democratic votes. The significance here, 36.5% votes Republican in 2016 in these largest Latino counties, 43% Republican in 2020. Is this graph going to continue through 2024? We're not going to know for a while. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite our fellow panelists to come on up to stage, and we will continue this event.
So before Laird and the panel gets into this, I wanted to, first of all, thank all of you for being here. I'm Cynthia Hudson. I'm the Managing Director and Senior Vice President at CNN in Español. And I wanted to start by saying that we're very sorry that Boris Sanchez couldn't join us, but he is on hurricane duty, and he was literally getting lashed by the storm on Tampa Bay about an hour ago. We couldn't do anything about the hurricane, so that's why he's not here. But you are with an incredible panel. Maria and Rocio Velez, Maria Cardona, whom many of you have seen either in English or in Spanish, and Rocio as well. They are with Juan Carlos López, who is our Chief Political Director from Washington, D.C. And more importantly, they always have incredibly interesting conversations. And after seeing this graphs, I can't wait to see what this is going to happen. So I'm going to now leave it to the panel, but I wanted to thank you all and excuse Boris for not being with you all. Thanks.
Gracias, Cynthia. Buenas noches. So I'd like to start, as Cynthia said, Boris couldn't join us because of the hurricane, and obviously our thoughts and our prayers are with everyone who is in the path of such a difficult and large and dangerous storm. But let's go into the storm that's coming politically. And when you look at these numbers, Laird, these are the counties, this is the vote, this is the evidence. Looking at the numbers, does something tell you why this is happening? Is there a way to understand why this change has been so dramatic when we see there was 19 million votes the difference in one of the last graphics. It went from 14 million to 7 million, then it's 11 million to 19?
I don't know. I don't have an answer. That's why we have Rocio and Maria here to offer comments here. Look, I think there are many. I could speculate on some of the possibilities here. I think that, number one, Latinos in general, irrespective of nationality, are much more integrated into the mainstream of American political life than you would think. And what that means is we all know that the American body politic is divided, 50-50. And so there's no reason to say there's some sort of exceptionalism among Latinos, that Latinos are embracing Republicans or Democrats just like the rest of the population is. So I think that's one point, and I'll leave my colleagues to speculate on some of the others.
Rocio and Maria, we've talked about this many times. We haven't seen evidence that this is a result of parties going after the vote, because it seems, as Laird very well explained, there is no Latino vote as a homogeneous vote. There is a Mexican vote, there is a Puerto Rican vote, U.S. citizens by birth, and then other groups in a very tight election. What have you heard? What have you seen?
Well, first of all, thank you all for having us here. One of the things that is so strange, and thank you, Laird, because you really covered a couple of things that were a surprise to me in terms of even if we analyze all of these things, is the fact that, you can have Puerto Rican vote and Dominican, one of them in Pennsylvania, and we don't agree on many things. We can agree on food, we can agree on a couple of things, but in terms of how this is, being said right now and what I'm hearing people, first of all, it's the economy. And when in 2020, the issue that really mobilized most of the Latinos themselves was healthcare. Believe it or not, it was because of COVID and what we were going through, and people actually, concerned with what Donald Trump was saying back then, and they were just tuned off, and they were like, this guy, I don't want to, vote for him. Now, what I'm hearing, and I live in a rural area in Virginia, and I talked to a few Latinos, but I talked to people that are from all over now, Venezuelans, and they tell me it's the economy, right? So that mobilizes me. However, that does not translate into registering to vote. And there's a difference. I mean, we can all speculate, we can throw things, we're saying that, but I don't see the enthusiasm. One of the things that I don't see out of the Democrats, and I know that Maria is going to talk about this, is that when Obama, he did the movement.org and everything that he did, Hispanics were registering, and they were like, I'm enthusiastic about this guy. Once, Vice President Harris took over in the ticket 2 months ago, we don't know the level of enthusiasm of...
I do.
Okay,
I have some numbers on that. No, pero sigue.
No, I think that the level of enthusiasm is there because you switched from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, but it's not about, okay, does she represent something that it's a future for the economy? Do I have something? Is she talking to me, a Dominican, a Cuban, a Mexican, who talk completely different, small business owners, and who are concerned about what's coming up in the next year? So...
But what you're not going to get the Dominicans and Puerto Ricans to agree on is on baseball. So, ahí no, eso es tiempo perdido. Maria, there's perception that the Obama campaign was very successful with Latinos. But when you really look at the Democrats and their inroads with Latinos, Harry Reid, the late senator, really had a plan. That plan hasn't been followed after. But what are your numbers? Before we came, you sent me a study on the Latino poll and how at this moment, Kamala Harris has an advantage. But we were seeing the advantage was 60-40, 65-40. Donald Trump does very well with Latinos.
He certainly does better than his Republican predecessors, most of them. Let's remember, Ronald Reagan got 40% of the Latino vote, and that was a high watermark.
And George W. Bush
and
was
George
35.
W. Bush, right, exactly. A couple of things here. We're talking about the increase, and it's true, the increase of Latinos voting for Republicans from 2016 to 2020. But what's interesting is Obama did get, I think, in the low 70s of the Latino vote. Hillary Clinton did too, and she lost. And so you go to 2020, where Donald Trump got these increases that you're talking about, and Joe Biden won the election, and Donald Trump lost. So what really matters here is where are the Latinos voting, and who are they voting for where they are? And this goes to the swing states, Laird. And you're right, the swing states right now, it's not the majority of where Latinos are. But, and this is where I think the Harris campaign is being very smart, the margins by which Joe Biden won in 2020, and we all know it was something like 80,000 votes or maybe even 70,000 votes in 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. The margin of the, not just eligible, but registered, and in some states I think just eligible, but it shows the potential. The margin with which Joe Biden won is a lot smaller in these states of the percentage of Latinos that are eligible to vote. So that tells you the potential of the Latino vote in terms of defining these elections, which is why the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign, they say they are, but I don't really see any evidence of it, are really going after these specific pockets of Latinos in neighborhoods even. They are micro-targeting these Latinos. In Pennsylvania, they're micro-targeting the Puerto Ricanos, the Dominicanos, the Mexicans. In Michigan, in Georgia, because Joe Biden's victory in Georgia, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, they were won on the margins, and a lot of it was won because of the targeting of the Latino vote that the campaign did in 2020. Now, the growth of the Latinos who voted for Republicans in 2020 happened in several of the counties where, frankly, from an electoral standpoint, it didn't matter because it happened in Florida and it happened in Texas. Those were the 2 places where we saw the major growth, significant and worrisome growth from a Democratic standpoint of Latinos voting for Republicans. And so fast forward to 2024, and the reason why the numbers I sent you are so significant, Juan Carlos, and what I sent was a study by pollsters who really focused on large sample Latinos, correctly weighted, interviews done in English and Spanish, and weighted for geographic and demographic data. And it shows that Kamala Harris is reaching the 2/3 number. She's not there yet, but she's almost there, of what Joe Biden got in 2020. And Donald Trump has a little bit more. He's at like 33-35% of the vote right now for Latinos. And the difference is that from 2020 to now, there is between 5 million to 6 million new Latino voters. And what that means is that even if Kamala Harris gets a slightly smaller piece of that much bigger pie, it's still a lot more pie that will be effective and transformative where it matters in these battleground states.
As you see how the party operates, how the campaign operates, are you as a strategist satisfied with what they're doing to get Latinos to vote? Because we've talked about the potential. We've talked about how it could be definitive. We talked about, but then when push comes to shove, the money doesn't go where it has to go.
So that's a great question. As a Latina, I will never be satisfied until, the majority of a campaign money goes to Latino votes. But I have seen, and I have to give credit where credit is due, this campaign has put record amounts of investments in reaching out to Latino voters in English and Spanish, bilingually, even in Spanglish, going door to door, going digital, really going after the young Latino vote, and much earlier on than I have ever seen it before. They are embedding Latino and Latina strategists all over the country. They're going into the communities, hiring people from the communities to talk to those communities. And they are doing it smarter and more efficiently and earlier and more robustly than they ever have. Is it enough? Again, as a Latina, I will never think it's enough, right? But they are doing it more effectively than what I have ever seen. And just one last note to Rocio's point about the enthusiasm. There is a data firm called TargetSmart that really measures not just polling, but they measure real, what I think is more real compelling data, which is voter registration and early vote data once that comes in. In the 3 days following the switch of President Biden to Kamala Harris, in the swing states, in 3 swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and I think Georgia was in there too, they measured the percentage of additional Democratic voter registration among young Black women voters. That was an increase of 180% of young Black women who went out to register when they saw that Kamala Harris was the new nominee. The demographic that followed it, young Latinas, at 150% registered over those same 3 days in 2020. So that tells me there is massive enthusiasm for Kamala Harris, who is the first woman of color, of Asian descent, daughter of immigrants from California, a majority Latino state, who understands the issues that are important to Latinos, and she's been focused on the economy. She's been focused on small businesses, giving them the $50,000 grant. She's been focused on home ownership, which, as we all know, is the definition for Latinos of the American dream, giving first homeowners $25,000. Children, right, $6,000. So she has been very specific on this issue of the economy, and that has been very compelling to these voters.
Maria, Rocio, and I have been doing this for a very long time, so I don't even have to ask Rocio. I've just been seeing the expressions, knowing that she has disagreed at some point, so I'm not even asked. Please, go ahead.
I can't help it. I mean, my face, twitches, but the thing about, she's been, promising, or she's talking to these voters and telling them about the 50,000 or what. You can talk and say, I'm going to give you a $50,000 credit if it's going to be for an unrealized capital gain. That doesn't mean anything to a small Latina who has a food truck or anything, because the first year that she's got to operate that food truck, she may not even make even the $50,000. It doesn't make anything and no sense. You have to talk to a Latina woman, whether it's her pastor talking to her or whomever, or a young Latino, Hispano, Mexicano, Cubano, and you got to talk to them in I saw her yesterday in one interview, and she was talking about Medicare and maybe expanding it to care for a parent, right?
The sandwich
and that whole
generation.
Sandwich thing. And I said, well, that makes sense, right? And if you talk to a Latina and you tell her, listen, I have to take care of my aging parent and also of my child, and you talk to them in Spanish and English and Spanglish, they're going to understand that. But if you just say, the same answer, which is, I am aspiring and I come from a middle class, and it's just the same platitudes, you're not going to get the message through. And the one thing about Vice President Harris, which is good, is she's disciplined, right? So she's been talking the same way over the last few weeks, and that's okay. But in order for her to really get to the goal in the post line right now, she has to finish strong. And the one thing to talk to all of us Latinos, and especially to the young population, to get out the vote, is to tell them, look, I know it's really hard to buy your first new home. And it's not about the $25,000, because you have to pass that through Congress. So most of the people are not within the details, but you have to tell them it's been really rough. Inflation has been rough. And she really has to differentiate herself from President Biden, whether she likes it or not. She's very loyal. She's continued to be loyal, but it's just not helping her in terms of, this is how different I am, and this is, it's the future. The economy is going to grow. It's going to grow. Whether you talk the good game or not, come with me. But it can't be just, it's aspiring and just join me, because if not, you're saying the Latina woman and the black, and you said the black women are voting for her. That's a guarantee. Maybe, for Donald Trump, the black male vote is actually growing, and so is the male vote, on the side of Latinos. So it's about finding the common ground in terms of the swing states. I mean, in terms of strategy, right? For the campaign. but really talking specifics, and it could be 2 messages. You could stick to, that whole Medicare and expanding it. You have to do 2 messages because people, you all know, the very first few days or the first 2 months, everybody promises a lot of game, and it's all about executive orders, and then maybe 1 or 2 bills get through, and that's it. So focus on 1 message. Get me, I don't know, whether it's baseball, arroz con habichuela, whatever, but you have to talk to us.
Laird, when you look at the numbers, you've been doing this for a long time, many elections. Can you draw a deduction from what you saw from 2020 and the results of that year, 2016 of the results of that year of the Latino vote, or are the numbers too small to do that?
Let me make a couple of comments here. First of all, when you analyze the age structure of the Latino population of the United States, it skews toward the younger ages. Latinos are much younger than non-Hispanic blacks and non-Hispanic whites and Asians. Unfortunately, younger voters have the lowest registration and turnout rates. I think that's important to note. On the other side of the coin, when we look at registration and participation rates by sex, we find that female Latinos vote at higher rates than males. And I think that is something that is very favorable for the Harris campaign. Now, let me turn to something else, the economy. I hear this over and over and over again, and as a social scientist and an economic historian, the Republican Party has been very, very effective at creating a mythology which is not true. The economy of the United States was not better off under Donald Trump. Unemployment is at a historical low. If anyone has looked at the S&P 500 averages or the Dow Jones Industrial averages, they're at a historical high. Now, one thing are facts. A second thing is how people perceive the propaganda machine of both parties. And I think the Republicans have been very effective at promoting a series of falsehoods. And that Latinos fall for them is not so surprising because, as I indicated before, Latinos have been integrated into this whole 50-50 split in the United States political opinions. And so the big lie does not simply go over among poorly educated non-Hispanic whites. It goes over among sectors of the Latino population as well.
I guess, Maria, we go to that point. The numbers show the economy did not go into a recession. Inflation is going down. Unemployment is low, but people don't feel that. So if people vote by what they feel, not by what they don't read, they don't go into the statistics that Laird produces. They just, whatever they're feeling that day.
Right. That's true. But a couple of things of note. People are starting to feel better about the economy. They are starting to feel better specifically about their own personal economies. And if you see in polls, the gap that existed in strength on the economy between Trump and Biden is now getting a lot smaller, and Kamala Harris is narrowing and closing that gap. And in fact, on inflation, I think it was either in the last CNN poll or one of the last national polls, she's even with Donald Trump on who can deal with inflation. So her message is getting through. To your point, Rocio, her message is getting through because she's doing 2 things. She's talking about specifics, which are the things that I talked about, and she's also acknowledging that people are still hurting, that costs are still too high, that when you go to the grocery store, people still feel it in their pocketbooks, that it's too hard to buy a house if you're a first-time homeowner, that it's too tough to pay rent and then also have to pay for prescription drugs. So she is doing the, massively compelling Bill Clinton, I feel your pain message, while at the same time connecting it with real specific policies on how she plans to get things done. The other thing I would say is if in fact it was true that people only voted on the economy, Donald Trump would be 15 points ahead. I mean, that's the only way that you could say, oh, see, the economy is it, and that is all, I get in fights with my dear friend James Carville because he says it's the economy, stupid, and yes, it's partly, but that's not all it is. And we saw this happen in 2022 when everyone was predicting a red wave of Republican takeover of the House and the Senate, and it didn't happen. Why? Because people, and especially women, can go into the polling booth and think about more than one issue. I can think about the economy, but you know what has become a critical issue for Latinas? Reproductive rights, reproductive health, and the focus on threats to democracy. Those two things are massively undermeasured in polls, and it's happening now yet again. Because if it wasn't, then I would say again, Donald Trump would be 10 points ahead. And in the last New York Times poll that came out yesterday, Kamala Harris was 3 points ahead of him nationally. And on the issue of who cares about people like me, she beat out Donald Trump. On the issue of who represents change, who is the change candidate, she beat out Donald Trump. So on all of these measures that people think are the one thing that's going to measure who's going to win, she's doing really, really well. And on the issue of reproductive rights, which I still think, to your point, Laird, that is going to be so mobilizing for women, and especially Latina women. That issue has become front and center for young Latina women. It is going to be incredibly powerful to make sure that they are motivated to go vote.
But if we go the difference between fact and fiction, there's a lot of fiction in this campaign. You look at Donald Trump. So his economic proposal is to impose tariffs. Tariffs will be passed on to consumers. Prices will go up, and different economists have shown that his economic plan would raise the deficit and would make life more expensive. Inflation will go up. He was threatening car makers with tariffs from Mexico, even though he renegotiated the free trade agreement to allow those cars to be made in Mexico. He is making proposals that honestly don't make sense, but people don't care. People are not voting based on the specifics. They vote on what he represents to them, it seems. And we've seen a tendency of young Latino men, especially Puerto Rican, Dominican, to gravitate toward Trump. So there's something about this election that isn't about fact, it's about feelings. And people talk about inflation, talk about the economy. Unemployment is very low, but people tend to not feel it. So it's more a thing of emotion than a rational decision on what's best for the country.
So you all keep talking about feeling, right? And you feel an economy. I don't know if I feel an economy, but I experience an economy. And what I experience,
you feel it in your pocket when
right,
you go to the supermarket.
But Laird was talking, about, that the economy and how people feel and the way that, the message is portrayed. The truth of the matter is that automobile insurance is double. I mean, I pay double what I used to pay 4 or 5 years ago. People are having 2 and 3 jobs, and not people that is just blue-collar worker, right? And wages have not really gone up, and you're paying double of what you were paying. Mind you, in 2019, 2020, the rate was like 2.5, and now it's like 6.8, 6.5. So you're paying double the amount. And so if you're graduating right now, right, from CUNY, and you really feel like I'm going to have an MBA and I'm going to buy my house, and it's $1.8 million or $1.5 million, and you're going to go pay $6,000, $7,000 a month, plus you have those nice, student loans, you're going to experience, not feel that the economy has not gotten better or did get better. And the one thing that I do have to say is the fact that, yes, a lot of people, and S&P and NASCAR and all of the numbers are high. But when you talk to somebody who's really having, like I said, 2 jobs, a small business, and it's feeling the brunt of actually paying higher in insurance for, a liability insurance, automobile insurance, having to, pay for kids, and also, a home and a mortgage, then you're experiencing a different kind of economy. And so
Then again, if you're experiencing that, and you have someone telling them that what they're going to do is going to make it worse, then why would you gravitate to that
Understood.
person?
And when Donald Trump says, about the tariffs, and you think that's a criticism, the Biden administration actually, rolled over and did they do away with the tariffs? No, they didn't. They followed exactly what Donald Trump is doing. What I'm saying is both campaigns, they're not promising anything that is a solution. So I'm actually saying as an independent, because right now I'm undecided, right? So Kamala Harris has to win my vote. And I talk to people who are independent, and they're saying none of these two people who are actually just telling you, you know, when I was president, you were better. And the other one is saying, you know, let's just move from change. What kind of change? You're the vice president, and you were with Bidenomics or Biden, and my economy has not gotten better. So if you want to sway and I agree with Maria on this, the reproductive rights and women's issues, like I said, you know, childcare or caring for your aging parent, that is something that touches the fiber of any independent woman. So those are the messages that you really have to focus. But if you just pretty much hammer on Donald Trump is bad and he's a threat to democracy, and you are losing the vote that you could grasp, which is actually those people who are on the fence and the young voters who are not registering because you're like, you know what, I'm you know, tone deaf. I don't care. These people don't want my vote. They don't want to earn my vote.
But they're not just talking about that. Kamala Harris is not just talking about that. And in fact, at every single one of her rallies, she goes through all of the policies that I just mentioned. She talks about how costs was still too high. She talks about how she is going to be the one who wants to give everyone an opportunity economy. She talks about wanting to expand the middle class so that everyone feels the benefits of an expanding economy. She talks about how she's going to continue to fight inflation. So she is doing all of that at the same time, which is why I think that what she's doing is very smart. And she's doing it. She's going to the non-traditional places. And I know this makes traditional media people go crazy because she's not doing traditional media. She's doing it all. 60 Minutes, CNN, Call Her Daddy, All the Smoke, Howard Stern. She's going to where the voters are. And that is a very smart strategy with all of these messages, because you can walk and chew gum at the same time if you're an effective campaign that can turn on a dime. And she has had to put together an effective campaign that can turn on a dime because she hasn't had a year and a half to run for president. So I think for everything that she has had to do and for all of the introduction to her history and her biography that she has had to present to the American people, she is in a really good place right now. Do I think she's going to win 100%? No, of course not. I hope she does.
Maria,
but there's a lot of work still to be done.
Two things that I think stand out. She's raised, Kamala Harris, her campaign has already raised $1 billion. That's the other thing. So I find that very interesting. The other interesting thing I found is that as the campaign progresses, Donald Trump makes wilder and crazier statements. Do you see that in Rocio as a sign of desperation from Trump, that he sees the internal numbers are not showing what he wants to see? And if Kamala Harris is running such a weak campaign, how is she being funded in that way, and how is she outraising Republicans that normally raise more than Democrats?
Exactly, because she's not running a weak campaign. People, and these are the other numbers that I talked about, other than the polls, where you can measure really where people are. And when you measure where and to whom people give money, there is no better measurement of what people are feeling and who they are actually investing their hard-earned money in. And for Kamala Harris to have raised over $1 billion, that tells you a lot right there. And the fact that the Trump campaign, and I don't think it's the campaign, I think the campaign goes crazy every time he goes in front of a rally and says all these bat-esque crazy things, because he gets crazier and crazier every time he talks. And he insults women, and he insults Latinos, and he insults immigrants, and he insults everyone. He insults all of his opponents. And it is a head scratcher for strategists who think that, well, if he thinks he has his base tied up, he doesn't need to be doing that. He needs to actually be trying to bring in the voters that he needs to win, which are independents, suburban women, the people that he lost in 2020 to Joe Biden, that he can't win without. He is not going to win those people by talking about Haitians eating pets in Springfield. He's not going to be winning those people when he talks about and lies about FEMA and hurricane relief that actually puts people's lives in danger when his own Republican governors across the country have to tell him to cut the shit. So I don't understand. I don't understand, but as a Democrat, let's keep having him talk.
Hey, listen, 2016, Donald Trump was, in the bar of the crazy and all of the different things that he was low energy, Jeb, everybody was really undermining and definitely just underestimating the factor of the phenomena, right? That we actually talk about the craziness and the Hannibal Lecter, comments and all of the things. And actually, I'm surprised that Donald Trump is only 3%, down nationally. And with the economy that you all described, you should have right now a candidate with 9%, which was Biden at this stage was 9% nationally in all the polls. And, the Democrats were swinging in there. And one thing that I have to say is in 2016, we were all feeling, and I voted for Hillary Clinton, and we wanted, that glass ceiling super shattered, and we were all in shock. And I remember being with all of you covering the results. And this to me is the conundrum. It's the fact that we all think that politics was the way that when Bush and Obama and Reagan and the statistics, everything changed, people. And we're more divided than ever, and everything is a surprise. I mean, whether we factor and we can think, every day I watch CNN for the latest polls and everything, and I'm like, and I love the guy that, I forget his name, but he's fantastic, yes. And I say, oh my God, today he said that, but the next day he contradicts himself, and I'm like, that's the way that the whole world feels. It's every day is a surprise. So yeah, right now it's completely unpredictable. I don't know, money-wise, sure, you guys have the game, you have $1 billion, but Hillary had more money, and, it just didn't, She didn't have $1 billion. Wait, she didn't have $1 billion. She had more money.
And in all honesty, Hillary made some big mistakes. She didn't even go to Wisconsin.
That's right.
She didn't, she took a lot for granted.
Yeah.
And that is a big lesson that the Kamala Harris campaign is taking to heart.
Laird, what you look at when you read the country through your numbers, does that show how emotion is so different from reality? You talked about the big lie, and it's a constant. Do the numbers reflect it in any way?
I think that people vote subjectively, not objectively. And I think that the points made about the economy are well taken. Rocio, I certainly understand that people experience hardships, rising interest rates, difficulty paying bills, inflation. But these are not because of any policies. These are because of the cyclical nature of how economies work over time. I think that's important to note. From an objective point of view, if we examine the Trump years, not only was the economy in much worse shape than it is now, but something that no voter will even focus on, the distribution of wealth in the United States got worse. The rich got richer, the poor got poorer, the middle class treaded water under Donald Trump. Tax breaks for billionaires don't work. That is called trickle-down economics. That is letting the free hand of the marketplace determine how people interact in the world. And there's one thing important to note about the free hand of the marketplace. Watch for that extended middle finger, because it's directed at a lot of people here. And so, you see, these are the objective facts. I don't think people vote on the basis of objective facts. They vote on the basis of subjectivity. And people are very susceptible, whether they're Latinos, whether they're African Americans, whether they're non-Hispanic whites, to manipulation by the portrayal of false imagery. This repeating of the economy was better under Trump is not true. That over 50% of Republicans believe that Haitians eat cats and dogs? Really? What kind of commentary is that on the political sophistication of people who buy into this absolute and total nonsense? I think, my opinion is, that the real issues here are race and racism and anti-immigrant bias among the population. And let me say one more thing. Non-Hispanic whites do not have a monopoly on misogyny or racism. There are sectors of the Latino population that buy into this, that are racist, that are anti-women, and I think that I'm certainly not generalizing about all Latinos in sectors, that Latinos are more like the general population, in my opinion, in terms of the way they perceive the political dynamics of this election and the decisions that they make.
So I'd like to thank Dr. Bergad, Rocio, Maria, and all of you for joining us. It's been an interesting experience. We'll be around. We'll be hanging around for a while if you want to come down and chat. Muchas gracias.